Today, we're going to get through the very unsexy topic of posture, actually, but we're going to spice it up a little bit today. Most people's goals, we get losing weight, tone up really, which all that really means is they want to lose some body fat or build some muscle. They want to be able to move better with a little bit less pain. They want to be much more confident in kind of what they can do with their body and or activities that they want to be able to do. And they want to either understand exercise or how to move or some technique around that better. And pretty much for all of those most common goals, the answer that everyone's looking for is in sort of the things in the gym that they actually don't prioritize. And if they just prioritize different things, they'd actually get the result that they want. So today I want to delve into that because posture and stability and how that's incorporated into someone's movement regimen is one of the answers to almost all of those goals. So I want to delve into what these exercises are, kind of how they relate to these goals, and actually how to implement them sort of starting today. So, a bit of a fun fact to start, like the number one reason people visit the sort of the GP is a common cold. And the number two is actually some form of ailment. And one of those is back pain or lower back pain specifically. The stats say that 80% of adults will have some form of lower back pain in their lives, which is astoundingly high. And in terms of low back pain, this accounts for like more lost person hours than any other type of occupation injury for people under age 45. We're losing people. This often occurs due to poor posture. So that's kind of why I want to delve into posture and stabilization today and how it relates to everyone's goals. Let me see. Just want to check with Marita. Can you still hear me, Marita? Not sure everyone else can. Maybe signing in, signing out might do a really good trick. But feel free, guys, if you can't, write in the chat. So let's delve into what is posture? Because I think that's confusing to people. Well, it's just the position of the body, really. But what we want to do is it describes how your spine is aligned to your head, shoulders, and hips. And they should stack together in the right positioning. And what I mean is this refers to sort of a neutral spine, which you'll hear a lot in the gym. You'll have muscles, joints, and ligaments in alignment. And this is important because it reduces stress on the body, helps keep you flexible, reduces fatigue, and helps you maintain your balance. So why do I care? Well, bad posture, weak stabilizing muscles, tight postural muscles lead to a whole cascade of negative outcomes. If there's misalignment, it creates compensation in the body. And that's the real part I care about. If the body, whatever the part of the body that is supposed to do a role, if it can't perform that role, or it has a reduced capacity to be able to perform that role, other things have to pick up the slack and compensate for you. The role still needs to be done, or the movement pattern that you're trying to do still needs to be accomplished. So the body will just compensate in another way and get other parts of the body to do that task. And this always comes at a cost. And this is one of the major reasons we care so much about posture, stability, and alignment here at Fifth. It's not a super sexy topic. It doesn't quite stack up to fat loss and body composition and performance, but it impacts every single one of those. And that's why we care so much. So we're trying to flip how people think about their training and movement so they can get an understanding of how it affects some of the goals that they truly want, and posture and stability are at the core of all of those things. So this misalignment, it creates forces in certain muscle groups and joints, and they're going to get overworked. This is one of the key reasons we see so many overuse injuries in the gym. They are taking on more load or doing more tasks than they're designed to do. Specifically, we've got weak core and stabilization muscles, and this leads to a compensatory tightening of other muscles to have to maintain balance and function, resulting in tightness and reduced flexibility or range of movement if we're talking the joints. So the body will then adapt to these imbalances. And again, the benefit would be the body's really smart and we're really lucky that it does adapt. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to move very well. But there's a downside, and the cost is poor neuromuscular patterns, really. And this will make your movements really inefficient, and it significantly increases your risk of injury. So, not on top of that, it's going to slow your recovery due to sort of chronic strain and impede your hypertrophy and performance goals, and make your training less effective and more susceptible to injury. So the cascade for poor posture and poor alignment is quite large, and it will affect almost every goal that you have in the gym in a physical standpoint, but almost from an entire wellness standpoint. And we'll talk about that in a second. So these overall compensatory mechanisms obviously limit, initiate a poor posture, and it'll have a whole bunch of cascades. And sort of what will that look like? Well, it looks like a cycle of injury often. You'll have muscle tightness, you'll have, joint strains or aches and pains. Often you'll have neck or back pain, lower back pain, headaches or tension headaches. You'll have overuse injuries or things that are just not always feeling 100%, and people work through them often. You might get an acute injury. Yeah, it could be during the exercise or another activity. You definitely get impaired performance and hypertrophy. You'll have a high level of inflammation in the body due to this misalignment. That slows recovery, and you'll get poor neuromuscular patterns in the body, which also leads to injury, really. So what's actually an example of all of that? So most people, when they sit upright, you can kind of do a forward posture here, and we can actually get a really good look at how the upper thoracic neck region is either in alignment or not in alignment. So why do we have so much poor upper body posture? Well, a lot of it's from what we're kind of doing now, really. We're sitting, we're at computers a lot, we're on our phones a lot, we drive a lot. A lot of it is anterior facing. And what happens is we often end up with a rounding of the shoulders and a sort of a forward head tilt. You've only got to look around, most neighborhoods, and you'll see people later in life with severe hunchback and a rounding of their shoulders and a forward head poke due to this compensation. And that's just years or decades over time of the body adapting to the poor posture. So what's happening in this, with that posture? Well, we've got a rounding of the shoulders. So you get an internal rotation at the shoulder joint, which with the often lack of thoracic mobility, which is that mid back, the head will tilt forward to kind of make up for a bit of that lack of mobility. This upper trap here, right here, goes up to the neck, to the shoulder, is often really tight. Your pec or your chest muscle, constantly tight through internal rotation, and your pec minor here dragging the shoulder forward as well. In between your shoulder blades, you should be able to squeeze them really tightly together, and they should come together and glide the scapula together. Your rhomboids are the muscles between those, and they're often weak, and there's really poor muscular or neuromuscular pathways to them to activate in the first place. On your scapula here, you've got a bunch of your rotator cuffs, which are one of the key stabilization muscles of your shoulder, which often aren't very active, poor neuromuscular function or patterns, and they're often weak on people. And all of that leads to a really tight trap, which is trying to compensate and carry load for a shoulder that should be in completely other places. People think it's just a upper body, misalignment there, but that actually then has big consequences for the rest of the body. It makes it really difficult to keep a neutral spine. It's going to have ramifications to your breathing and how your diaphragm is and how tight that is. It's going to have big impacts to your lower back and your lumbar and keeping that neutral. You'll often get an extension through your lumbar, which means you're going to get an arch in the back. Again, there's just compensation occurring. That arch then puts load through the spine or through your discs, that arch also tightens up your hips, and that arch also means your glutes disengage, which means you have a higher chance of back injuries. And we're talking about something that's actually shoulder related. So the body's complicated and it has lots of pathways that are interconnected. And that's kind of why we care about that alignment so much. It is the foundation for good movement and function in the body. And that is what most people want for their goals. So that's why we want to get that right so that everything else can work on the back of that. So in terms of like a pure hypertrophy example, we've just talked about that poor posture, and that's going to lead to misalignment, which is going to prevent optimal muscular activation. So we just think of that tight pec. We're rounded in the shoulders here, pecs tight, shoulders tight. We're rotated through. As we're trying to do sort of push movements that are going to activate that pec muscle, the pec doesn't really activate very well in that contracted position here with a shoulder that's rounded and rotated. That's just going to cause compensation. It'll go right here into the shoulder joint. It'll go right here into the AC joint. It'll go right into the actual joint capsule, much more than it will the actual pec fibers of the muscle, which activate much better when they're taller, stretched, and the shoulders are back, which allows the stretch in the actual muscle fibers to be able to produce the power or the role that we're looking for the muscle to actually do. So at best, in a poor posture, you get an inefficient movement pattern. At worst, you get an injury because it's just too much compensation. And this happens a lot on your bench press, on your squats, on your deadlifts, your big compound lifts, because people are trying to push heavy weight with poor form rather than trying to utilize good, efficient tempo and technique with reduced weight to actually get the contraction in the muscle fiber, which has all the benefits from it. So what are our solutions to all of these things? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. The number one thing I would stress is you want to get a nervous system activation to get the response you want to increase your posture. That's the best way to increase posture. A lot of static stretching, while beneficial, and I would take any sort of improvement in flexibility and movement that I can, doesn't elicit the same response to the body to actually change the muscular length or the joint range of motion nearly as much as when you get a nervous system activated exercise, which does that much better. So what does that actually look like? And there's kind of two different versions. You've got your yin-based yoga restorative types, which use your nervous system to go from that activated sympathetic nervous system all the way over to the more rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system. And as it changes from nervous system states, it actually softens the muscle, so to speak. And there's actually receptors in your muscle that are going to help elongate and reduce muscle tone, which is really important. Sympathetic strength, tempo, muscular activation type exercises are then using the load of what you're doing and the neural pathways to get the activation and the length in the muscle under the right movement patterns. And that tells the body how to do things properly. And it takes the tension out so that the nervous system understands where it can actually get to and how long that muscle can be. And that changes how much activation you get in your stability muscles, which is really important. So there's a couple of ways to do it. You've got, that will elicit some things. So you've got muscle spindles, which actually determine your length of the muscle. They change in response to good tempo strength training, which is really important. They kind of tell the body where or how tight a muscle should be. You've got some like feedback loops, which are really important, which allows the central nervous system to understand really how efficiently a muscle can move and within what range that muscle can move in, depending on a bunch of feedback that's getting from muscle, tendon, soft tissue, joint, all the rest of that stuff. You want to get an inhibition of antagonistic muscles. So all that means is like you get a proper, like a deeper stretch through activating reciprocal inhibition is what it is. So this process is just one muscle is the agonist, and you get another muscle, which is called your antagonist. And when one contracts, it helps the other elongate. So an example is when your quad tightens or you contract your quad, it helps your hamstring relax, really, because they work in opposition to each other. While one tightens, the other needs to relax to help that tightness happens. And we've just talked about changing your nervous system state. Not only does it help the muscle itself, but in terms of promoting relaxation, a body that has less stress and cortisol means that it has less tightness and tension in the body, because cortisol, you've got to remember, is kind of getting the body at like a spring to be ready to kind of do what it needs to do in case there's a stressful scenario happening. And in terms of a muscular biomechanical view, it means everything's tightening, just in case we have to launch and do something, quick at speed. So the more cortisol, the more stress we have, the more often we have, the more your body is just consistently tightening and shortening the muscle fibers, the joint, the tendon, the attachment. It doesn't really matter. It'll be a combination of those things, which is where activating that parasympathetic nervous system through restorative practices has a twofold effect. One, directly on the muscle or the joint, and two, on the nervous system to create an environment that allows the muscle or the joint to do that as well. Some really simple tips in terms of how to incorporate it is through your programming. And I see a lot of people, and I see a lot of healthcare practitioners, and they'll just give you a 30-minute list of, isometric rehabilitation and activation and range of motion activity, which isn't wrong. It's just the fact that nobody ever follows through on their rehabilitation programs. So I like to sort of condense things and use frequency to get people small wins. So it might look like adding a stability type movement into your warm-up, and we could be talking cable rotator cuffs. We could be talking slow tempo sort of trap raises on a bench. It could be sort of wall slides or dumbbell Cubans. Any of those things are really great stability exercises. And I like to pair them up in my warm-up. They're fantastic for getting muscular blood flow to muscle, ligament, tendon that need it for the appropriate exercises that we're about to do. And it shortens the time frame, because most people have limited time on how much they can spend in the gym or on their health and wellness activities at any one time. So I like to shorten the gap. 1 would be fine, 2 would be amazing, and if someone does 3, I'm like over the moon. But I normally start with 1 because it means they actually do it and they don't just tell me that they're going to do it at home. And that builds momentum for a second and then maybe a third. And then we use frequency of every time they exercise to actually get the benefit over time. And that's really important. Other ways you can do it, you can actually just use, if you're doing a more dynamic flow, warm up, you could just add it in to your first compound set. So if you are doing a squat, a deadlift, a bench press, a hip thrust, an overhead press, a row, any of the big sort of hypertrophy movements, you can just pair up the opposing or a actual same like stability muscle for that movement. That way you're getting the net benefit of the stability work, and it's shortening the time that you're doing it, and it reduces your risk of injury in the movement itself. There's no loss in that, and it stops most people just sitting on their phone, taking 90 seconds to 2 minutes, texting people instead of actually just doing something else. So it kind of wins across the board for that particular movement and the workout. And if you really need to, you could add that into any step along your exercise program that you like. That would be sort of my gold standard. And then when it comes to the actual exercise itself, it's form, which means tempo. It means the right technique and cues, and getting the right muscular activation through the course of that movement. That will normally require a lighter weight than most people would use. But for most people, I get it, because they use progressive overload in terms of increasing the weight through the movement, purely because they don't have the skill set to be able to create the intensity needed and through efficient movement. And that's really important. So slow tempo, muscular activation with the posture that is needed, or to the best of your ability with that posture, because it ends up being harder at the start with poor posture than it is midway towards the end. because you're fighting against a body that is tight, really tightly bound up, and a nervous system that doesn't really want to respond, which gets easier and easier and easier with time. But the more we can try to get that activation and slow things down, the better people will feel. And that way you'll get better results. You'll have a severely reduced chance of injury, which is amazing. You get far less overuse injuries. You'll have a body that moves significantly better, freer, and you'll get the results that you're actually after. People think it's in the high intensity and the high weight sort of progressive overload training. And I'm not saying that it's not, but that at the expense of everything else will just lead to injury at some stage. And it just depends on how durable your body is. And then you don't get the results anyway. And even if you do get to a certain, weight / strength, you're always banged up and have aches and pains the whole time anyway, which to me isn't a measure of long-term success regardless. Anybody have any questions after my big sort of rant? Oh, Viv, I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? I can't hear you, but anyway.
Oh, hold on.
Oh no, I can now. I can.
Okay.
I've got some double curvage scoliosis.
Yep.
And I know I need to do exercises before I come to the gym, or at least stretch my back. Maybe that is it most important at the beginning or at the end, or both?
I do both. They kind of just do different things. At the beginning, we're just priming the body and the nervous system to get the right level of activation and blood flow. It just primes the body and reduces risk of injury, which means when you actually train, your body is more mobile with more activation, so it can actually get the benefit out of whatever the movement is or the training style that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I know.
At the end, we're trying to take the tension and the load back out from what we've just given in the training. So it'll reduce tension, it'll get the length back to the muscle, it'll take any tension out of the joints, which is where most of the compensation happens anyway. And then you'll get the benefit of frequency. So I'd take either, honestly, but the gold standard would be...
It's putting it into practice and not just coming straight to a session. And the warm-ups that we do at the gym is fine, but for my body, I actually know that I need to do more.
I'd start with something as simple as 60 seconds and choose one exercise, because then it's just more a habit build than anything, because people just don't have that much time and they're not going to spend 5 to 10 minutes. But the only way they get to 5 to 10 minutes is by starting, super slow often, and then that'll just build the momentum.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll have to build it into my,
Perfect.
No, it's good.
Vince, Steffi, or we...
Sorry, no, I was just going to ask, obviously prevention's better than remediation, but when it comes to remediation, what's the success rate, and what's the I guess the process?
Remediation for anything in particular?
If you have let your posture get out of hand, obviously it's difficult to get good posture, I guess, very quickly, but is it just a matter of working the particular muscles you mentioned, or is it a more broader issue?
It depends on how far someone's posture, how bad it is. It also depends on whatever their baseline is as they come in. It's much easier if it's somebody who's trained in the past that's kind of just not done anything for a bit and has been doing something that's just kind of thrown it out for a little bit. That'll be a pretty quick, that might just be one phase, honestly. And then there are people that we get that literally haven't done anything ever, and that could be 30, 40, 50 years. That might take closer to 12 weeks to 24 weeks.
Okay, so it is reversible.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Okay. The body's amazing. The same way it's compensating, it'll adapt and reduce what it needs to do just as everything comes back as well. There'll be some underlying overuse tension or joint inflammation, just because of, that'll take a lot longer to dissipate, and there might be residual. But you can get the strength and the neuro and the muscular conditioning back into the body, honestly, really quickly. Like a good structured program, depending on the frequency. And normally I'd recommend a full body program of 3 days a week, because that means 3 times we get to attack the whole body, which is really important. You get to attack. And then I'd choose stabilizers for everything. Something that's sort of joint, shoulder related, something that's upper back, thoracic related, something that's actually sort of core, hip, lower back related. And there's normally sort of, let's say about 10. If we went into them, it's like the 4 rotator cuffs of the shoulder are always weak and out of balance. That's your mid trap here. So you got your upper trap, your mid trap's just behind it. So your upper trap elevates, your mid trap actually pulls it back into position, into the shoulder, into its appropriate position. That's always weak on people. The rhomboids between the scaps are underactive and weak, which just makes it hard for people to get that retraction back and down and actually stabilize and move their scaps really well. The hips, most people's hip flexors are way too tight from sitting, but they're also really weak, which is half the reason they're tight in the first place. So getting the hip flexor to be able to compress like a spring better actually stabilizes the hip and stops it from moving around so much. That then means your lower back doesn't take as much load, and your glutes will switch on a lot better, which then takes a lot of the tension out of the lumbar and the discs, which is really good. And then in terms of like the knee, just on the inside of your knee, you've got your VMO, which stabilizes the knee in conjunction with other things. And the sort of groin adductor is often really weak on people. And then there'll be something genuinely, whether it's the front of the shin and the tib, or your soleus, which should take a lot of the compression load for your sort of calf region and stabilize your feet. Honestly, most people that come in would have 80% of that to some capacity, but all you do is write a program that has all of those in them in a warm-up / superset fashion throughout the entirety of their workout. And they'll, within sort of 6 weeks, they feel astronomically better, just due to that frequency and just finally getting the body to sort of understand where it is in space and what actual muscular activation feels like. That's probably the hardest part early, because we're trying to coach a feeling and a sequencing that people don't understand. But once they get it, it comes pretty quick.
Nice. Thanks.
That's good.
We're done. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
I really hope we got something out of today. And I really hope, I would preface that, like, prioritizing posture and stabilizing muscles. If you flip the script, it's that is the foundation that allows you to do the strength, the endurance, the high intensity. It'll give you longevity in the gym. It really is the bedrock for, all round good movement health. So I'm just trying to restructure people's thinking into seeing what a massive positive it is, not a genuine burden that it is that people think of.
Definitely. Great.
Thank you, team. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you. Thank you,
day.
Sam. Thanks.